Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to Post Hoc Live. I'm Drew Armstrong, your host and the executive editor of Endpoints News. And boy, do we have a show for you today. It has been one of the wildest weeks of news I have experienced in a long time covering biopharma. We've got major M&A drama, huge news in Washington, all coming against a backdrop of big changes in policy, trade, and geopolitics. Now, to talk about it today, I am delighted to welcome our cousin from across the Atlantic, global pharma editor of the Financial Times, Hannah Kuchler. Now, as most of you know, Endpoints is majority owned by the FT, and while we don't share stories or content, we do get to work on events together and see each other in the building sometimes. Hannah and I have known each other for a bunch of years, crossing paths, covering this industry. She knows as much as anybody out there about pharma, about biotech. She writes great stories. You can find them on the front page of the Financial Times all the time. We're going to have a great conversation about everything that's going on. Now, we will also be in London together on November 11 and 12. We co-produced the FT's Global Pharma Summit, and we're going to have plenty to talk about. We wanted to give you a preview of that, as well as going over some of the big news today that's been breaking this morning, yesterday, Sunday, Friday, all of it, and get Hannah's perspective on it and just what the Brits think about all of this craziness that has been happening over in the United States. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping to get us started. If you're joining us for the first time, hello. Thank you for being with us. Post Hoc Live brings you the reporting, the analysis, and the debate that usually happens behind the scenes in our newsroom, right to you on screen. If you're with us on YouTube and you're not already following us, please hit that little subscribe button. You'll get alerts about future broadcasts. You can also sign up for the Post Hoc email letter in your endpoints.news subscription page. So Hannah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us. If you want to ask Hannah a question on the show, make sure to ask it, top it into our chat. And if you miss us live, recordings are going to be on YouTube and Spotify. We also got a little sign up for the FT Summit in there. Hannah, I am prepared to have like a cocktail the size of an oil tanker at the end of the day today once we get through this. Have you, like, what's your perspective on everything that is happening? I mean, we've got like this Novo Pfizer deal situation. We've got MFN news in Washington. We've got chaos at the FDA. I mean, like, I am having a hard time remembering a time on the beat that it has been this busy.
Well, I'm not going to try and bring you back to pandemic days because that might be the time when it was this busy. But outside of the pandemic, I totally agree. In fact, I think it's funny because it's like your show is about sort of behind the scenes in the newsroom. And I honestly feel like I'm going to have to take like 3 calls from an editor and write a story at the same time as chatting with you. Because, yeah, I mean, even today with Pfizer and Metsera, both Novo and Pfizer have increased their bids. We've had some more legal action. I think there's a court call going on right now. There's Pfizer's earnings call going on right now. And you guys just broke this news that that Lilly and Novo are reaching a deal with the White House on drug pricing. So, that's a lot.
There's a lot happening. Well, let's spend a little bit of time on this Novo Pfizer Metsera situation. And like, I will do the obligatory thing and say that it is 11:03 on Tuesday, November 4th in New York right now. And I believe, is it 3 p.m. or is it 4 p.m. in London? I know we just did the daylight, so 4 p.m. in London. So anything we say could be outdated in the next half of an hour. Let's just step back here for a second. Like, why are these companies fighting? You've done an amazing job covering the obesity market and a lot of the R&D developments and just how important these are. Like, why is the fight over this asset or this category of assets so intense? About it. Let's speak globally. Let's also talk about what with these companies as well. I mean, I haven't seen anything that's gotten this nasty and this public in a long time.
Oh yeah, the statements hurling back and forth are really quite, spicy. I think what's really interesting here is that the secret is that Metsera isn't like the best thing since sliced bread, right? Like, this is a company, it doesn't have anything in phase 3. Like, I don't even think its phase 2B is read out. It's not like when it went public, people were like, oh, they weren't like, oh my God, this is going to change the entire obesity market. So I think this is a story which is actually a lot more about the position that Pfizer and Novo Nordisk are in themselves than whether Metsera is an amazing thing that everyone has to own.
Yeah.
And I think think on that front, at Pfizer, you've got Buller, he's faced Starboard in the last year. He's kind of under pressure to get into this new market. They've had an obesity pill that failed themselves. And Novo, you've had like a crazy ride in the last few months where they've got rid of the CEO, the shares down 50%. The majority owners come in, he's booted out the board, and now he seems to be playing a bit of a role in its M&A strategy. I think they felt like they need to be bold, and they've been very bold.
Yeah, they have. And so you brought up something that I think is super interesting that we should talk about. And, it is the question of like, how good is this asset really? And I think one of the things that we've been debating, and I want to get your take on this, is like, does that matter? I mean, we've been living in an environment where like a lot of this comes down to supply, not demand, and pricing and access. And like, is it sufficient to have, however good the Metsera asset will be, and like they tell us how great it is, and like we'll see when the data comes out. But like, how does it matter if it's not like an absolutely A plus drug? Because I think one of the real, like if you're getting good enough weight loss, if you have a good enough side effect profile, and you're able to be on the market with substantial supply, and a competitive price, like that feels like one of these things that maybe that's sufficient for a win, just given the size of this category.
I think that is a fair argument, and that a small slice of a huge pie is great. But remember that these companies, they're going to bring these assets in. I don't know exactly what the dates are, but they're pretty much around the time that the current drugs go off patent, right? So you might want to knock the price down, but you're going to knock it down as far as a generic version of semaglutide.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to. And I agree that like people will be prepared to pay for some really special things for, very, very small segments of the population. But I think for the mass market, they're all just going to go on the generic.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it feels like even if they aren't on the generic, it feels like we could be approaching a world where, I mean, you and I both covered, I believe, like the hepatitis C pricing wars. I mean, we've seen what price competition looks like when it gets really, really aggressive. We know that in, a lot of primary care markets, think about diabetes, like enormous amounts of discounting. Like, I think we're gonna, and you can see why Pfizer's making the argument that like more competition is better here, and you shouldn't let Novo have this asset, and so on and so forth. I get the point, and that's what the case that they're making in Washington right now, as well. I'll share mine, but like, what's your prediction on how this ends? Like, I'm a believer that money tends to solve a lot of problems in these situations, but like this feels personal as well. Like, I won't ask you to make a prediction, but maybe what kind of scenarios are you thinking about how this situation plays out when we're looking back on this, I don't know, in 3 days, a week, 3 weeks, whatever it is?
I think we'll be surprised if we haven't heard from the White House on this. I'm actually already a little bit surprised. It's only been a few days, but like Pfizer's statement was so obviously designed to appeal to Trump. All this stuff about them being an American challenger, as if Pfizer's this tiny company, and Novo being foreign, and we know that of all the drugs in the world that Trump cares about, the weight loss ones are the ones that he talks about the most, for sure. So I think the White House is going to get involved. What they do and how they do it, I mean, I'm not a fool, so I'm not going to go into that game.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the story that our reporter Max Bayer broke a little bit ago that Novo and Eli Lilly are near a pricing deal with the White House, and this is one of these most favored nation agreements where they agree to cut prices, typically in return for some other things like escaping tariffs. It looks like this deal is going to be around gaining access to the Medicare market, which is very important to these companies. It's been interesting to listen to the Pfizer side on this, which I think has been leaning very heavily, and exactly as you pointed out about this government angle. And like, yes, they did get this little indication that they have an FTC clearance, allowing the deal to close. And like, they're, I think, trying to signal to the market that they have pull in Washington. But I think the MFN question around Novo's drug is kind of a surprise wild card in here, where like being able to do the deal with Trump on what is probably the highest profile drug product we've had maybe ever. from a consumer interest standpoint, that feels like maybe this mixes up the Washington picture a little bit.
Well, yeah, and for a long time, the rumor was that Lilly was going to be the next company after Pfizer to do a deal. So there's something holding back a Lilly deal. And is it being played against Novo? Is Novo now feeling like it needs to be so bold that they're trying to undercut Lilly? I mean, there's a bit of a question about like who is doing this for Novo, because Novo keeps saying it needs a new US strategy and it hasn't hired many new US executives. But it wouldn't be surprising, given how sort of bold they're attempting to be, that they may be trying to kind of beat Lilly to an agreement with Trump.
Yep. I think that seems like entirely a possibility. It's going to be fascinating to watch what happens there. Will you talk about, how you see, I mean, this is like a new Novo in some ways too. I mean, like, what was their reputation 6 months ago prior to this?
I mean, I hate to lean so heavily on national stereotypes, but like their reputation was like, the Danish nice guys, kind of calm, considered, everyone worked there forever, not hard charging. And that has obviously definitely changed, because the majority shareholder, which was a foundation, which is also meant to be very arm's length. In fact, it says on their website, we are an arm's length manager. But they've kind of really got involved, and we've had some shocking days, gigantic share price drops, profit warnings, the CEO being unseated, then the board being unseated. So it has become a lot more aggressive. Now, whether any of that aggression is in the right direction, because what they need is aggression that helps them win the US market, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic to watch, because I think one of the things you often see with companies that maybe get a reputation for being a little bit slow and a little bit behind is, people start to agitate for them to do something, and that's not always necessarily the right thing. I mean, it's fun for us as journalists because it's lots of news and we get to write about it and there's excitement and the market's moving around and so on and so forth. But I think, oftentimes a company's problems are more complex than that. And I think it feels quite rare in an industry like pharma, where the timelines are really long, that we see this type of dramatic action with a whole bunch of job cuts. I mean, I guess we've seen it Bayer this year, or last year, and things like that,
Yeah,
but
but
I think there's
Bayer,
like a real
Bayer's
desire to
been
shake things up.
suffering for
Yeah.
years since they made the wrong call on Monsanto.
Yeah. And this doesn't seem to have still pulled them out of that hole either. I mean, they don't, and it doesn't seem to have solved their problems in many ways. But yeah, I mean, it has been fascinating to me watch them. They came back for this deal, which they had originally passed on. They came back for the Akero deal in MASH, which they had passed on. Like, it feels really like this is a different type of leadership. I think it also feels very high stakes, because if they screw this up, or overpay, and we get the phase, 2B data readout, and it's not great, and they've just spent $10 billion on this. I mean, this strikes me as a little bit of a gamble here. I'm sure they're doing it with lots of information, and they're thinking it's true, but like, this is a risky play to stake essentially your reputation on coming in and making a move like this. If this doesn't work out, or if they lose, I mean, this is, a real potential black mark, I think, on the start of this leadership tenure.
Yeah, and I would say, like, not even just the company. I mean, the new chair who comes in next month, we assume he'll be elected because he's also the chair of the majority shareholder. He comes in, Lars Rebien Sørensen, and he is, I mean, an investor I spoke to recently said he's like a king, right? So, like, you put yourself in a really powerful position, but that means anything that you do is going to come back to you. The buck stops with this guy now. And I mean, I just, other than bold and aggressive, I don't necessarily see the coherence in their strategy. Anyway, I'm speaking to Mike Doucet tomorrow because it's Novo earnings, so we'll find out what the CEO says then.
We will be. I'm very, very curious what they have to say, and I suspect they'll be addressing some aspects of this White House deal that we reported on there as well. Just to remind everybody, I am on here with the amazing Hannah Kuchler from the Financial Times, our partner in news and in events. Just a reminder to everybody, Hannah and I are going to be on stage in London in about a week plus. You can find a link to that event, which starts on November 11th on the Endpoints website. It's in our YouTube chat, and you can also go and search the FT Global Pharma Summit if you want to join. We also have a little discount code for you, Post Hoc 20. Hannah, let's change directions real quickly. What is you talk to a lot of folks around the globe, but also you're based in London. You talk to the Europeans a lot. What is their perception of everything that has been happening in Washington on trade, on the US relationships around the globe, expressed through healthcare policy and trade policy and tariff policy, the changes at the FDA? I mean, like how are the people in your part of the world thinking about the shifting posture and direction of the United States?
I mean, I think the biggest issue for everyone in the UK and in Europe is the threat of MFN, right? Because that actually could hugely affect how much European governments pay for drugs. You see that playing out in the UK most clearly because there's actually been active negotiations this year, not that they've gone very well, over how the UK pays for drugs. And, the industry in some ways kind of likes it, right? They've always been saying Europe should pay more. And so they can now use Trump as a way to go to governments and say, pay up or else. Now, the question are the governments really truly understanding that? You're seeing a little bit of change in the UK. They've proposed increasing the QALY, which is like the NHS's cost effectiveness measure, by about 25%. But overall, I think that the industry feels like governments still don't quite get it. And it'll only be maybe when more and more drugs aren't available in Europe that they'll realize that, Trump has had a huge power over what patients can get access to here.
When we started to see all these announcements about companies saying they were pulling back on projects in the UK, they weren't going to invest in their research centers, they were, really critical of the, commercial environment. I mean, that to us really read as a pretty significant piling on. What did people over there think about that? I mean, because it felt like, the industry was trying to beat up a country and make an example of it and send a little bit of a message to the rest of the market in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the people in the know, or the science ministers, health ministers, could see that the pressure was really rising. The UK has a lot of ambitions about being a life science superpower, and it doesn't do badly, but it's certainly doing worse than it did. And these companies were sort of trying to show that that is what is at risk if they don't change pricing policy. But I don't know, does that get through to the Treasury? The people that are actually going to pay for this? Doesn't seem like maybe it does. And then I also think there's an interesting question here about the population, right? I used to live in the US for many years, and because health insurance can be so patchy and so crappy a lot of the time, there is some awareness of whether or not you get access to something through your insurance. I think most people, in the UK love the NHS. They think it's underfunded. They care about waiting lists. They don't think about drugs available on it at all. And so there isn't that bottom up political pressure that might actually change the government to say, quite interestingly, one of the most controversial drugs, as your viewers will know, was Enhertu, this fantastic breast cancer drug from AstraZeneca that isn't controversial because the NHS is not paying for it for many indications. And so with that, recently I interviewed a patient who wasn't getting access to it, and you think, oh, she's going to be railing. Actually, I said, who do you blame? And she said, I blame the pharma companies.
That's really interesting. Yeah. How common is that attitude? Because I think, there's a perception in the US that if you denied a patient a drug like this, that, you'd be seeing it on the news the very next day. I mean, and the industry is very effective at, finding examples of these and making sure that they, the poor patient who can't afford the drug, that, that should never happen. And it's the mean insurance company or the mean government that's done this. And that's kind of the default dynamic. How common is that dynamic that you're describing over there? I mean, is there, in terms of a little bit of solidarity with, the government or the payer, the taxpayer on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, like actually most people have no idea. Like if you look at the charts about the lack of access in the UK to drugs, like people have no idea. And I think the kind of gut instinct to a lot of people, like say, for example, the Alzheimer's drugs, which aren't covered, is to say, well, yeah, that might be because the companies are taking the piss with the price, right? It's not necessarily to blame the government. And that's what the industry needs if it is going to get like a true change in how pricing works.
So I want another kind of UK, Europe, and global question for you here. So I've been watching, I think, with really significant interest, this question, and like the US often thinks about itself, I think, through a like competitive framework with the rest of the world all the time. And like, if something bad is happening here, other countries are going to try to steal our scientists. Anything good that's happening in China is bad for the US. When Europe has looked at the chaos in the U.S. Research system where we're pulling back on funding from the NIH to universities, there's a lot of headlines about, hey, our best scientists, which we spent 50 or 70 years in the post World War II power structure, attracting people here and telling them, you can be entrepreneurs, you can build something, that we're going to lose all of that, and that countries like Europe are going to be able to pull that away. Sorry, regions like Europe are going to be able to pull that away in UK, and that'll happen in China as well. What is the perception of that, and how is that story being written, in your part of the world? Is it thought about in the same way that like, hey, this is a great opportunity to steal talent and build up our workforce? And if so, are they really putting the resources behind it? Because I often find like, I think this may have been a story that you wrote or another of your colleagues wrote, where it's like, we're going to go after US scientists and we're going to bring them over here. And we put $50 million behind it. It's like, it's like a mid-sized Series A round for a Boston biotech. It just didn't feel, the headline looked so great, and then the number felt so small in comparison to the actual reality of the situation.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that there have been across Europe lots of sort of universities or institutes sort of saying this is a good opportunity. We're going to go after scientists, but I think they don't have the money. I mean, on a small scale, like running a lab here, the labs are like a lot smaller, right? You can't bring the zillions of people you've got in Boston over here. And also in terms of the government action, we actually can't, I mean, it's nowhere near to the same extent, but we're experiencing some of the same trends, right? Like disinvestment from science, like really strict visa requirements. And on top of that, we are, lower paid than whether in science or in other industries than people in the US. So I think that where I cool down is that Europe might get some Europeans who are a bit like fed up with being in the US. Maybe that's because of the political situation or because of their own personal impact of having grants withdrawn or something. But I don't think we're going to suddenly get like hordes of US scientists.
Gotcha. All right. You and I are 1 week exactly from being on the same stage in the same room in London. I'm very excited about it. What are you excited to chat about? I know you've got a bunch of panels that you're moderating. Who are you excited to talk with? What are you excited to talk about? What are you excited to ask?
Well, we were talking about obesity, obviously, and I'm going to be speaking to Teresa Graham, the CEO of Roche Pharma, and they are very excited about their obesity program. In fact, before current events, they had the biggest deal because they had this partnership with Zealand. So I think trying to understand, to your question earlier, like how does this obesity market actually develop?
Yeah.
And how they see that. I think they want to do a lot of combinations, which I know AstraZeneca is also interested in. So that's one thing. I'm also interviewing the head of the MHRA here. So he's the top regulator. Obviously, we've kind of not quite touched on the FDA yet, but like some of the same issues people are actually trying to address here. And yet we also have Brexit and all these things that make the MHRA a much less attractive regulator. He's also really interested in how you regulate AI, which, as we know, is a huge topic in our sector.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, Well, oh man, God, I can't think past the next 3 hours right now. But I will say, we have spent a huge amount of time over the last 18 months focused on a rise of China biotech. I'm moderating a panel there that I think has been one of, about the rise of China biotech, how they see the US in comparison, how to, we see them. I'm very excited to have that conversation. I think it's probably the most important story going on in global biopharma right now and for the next few years, despite all of our attention on the drama happening here in America. So I'm thrilled for that one. And
You need
I'm
to ask,
thrilled.
how much would Metsera cost if it came out of China?
Oh man, less I think is is typically the answer. And I suspect we will still be talking about that story when we were there. I just got word from our newsroom that I guess the court that was supposed to rule on whether they would step into this process with a temporary restraining order, they are deciding not to for the moment. I'm sure we'll have a story out on that shortly. So this will keep going on for at least the next several days. Hannah, thank you so much for being with us. Delightful to have you on the show at long last. Excited to see you next week. For our audience, just a reminder, if you will be in London or if you are desirous of watching online, you can come see both of us at the Financial Times Endpoints Global Pharma and Biotech Summit in London on November 11 and 12. You can use the code PostHoc20 to save on virtual registration over at pharma.live.ft.com. All that's going to be in the chat. You can also find it on the FT and Endpoints websites. That is all the time we have for today. You can keep up with our coverage at endpoints.news or by subscribing to our newsletters. Recording this conversation is going to live on YouTube. It'll be up shortly on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you are already signed up for our Post Hoc newsletter, you'll get notifications when we have a new broadcast coming up. If you're not, head over to endpoints.news. Then in the top right-hand corner, hit the reader profile link, then preferences, and then click to activate Post Hoc. You can also follow us on X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and Blue Sky by searching for Endpoints News. This show has been brought to you by the 17 coffees I've had today. You won't need to listen on 1.5 speed if you're on the podcast. But a huge thank you to our producer, Nicole Wetzman, and our engineer, Nat Gonzalez, for making this whole thing work. We will see you the next time news breaks.